Alrighty, it's 5:33. So out of respect for everybody's time, we would love to call this meeting to order. Welcome everybody to the Creeks Advisory Committee meeting. I'm going to reach out to Stephanie for roll call, please.
Chair Penny Owens.
Present.
Committee Member Ann Burdett.
Present.
Committee Member Stephanie Murray.
Present.
Committee Member Lori Gaskin.
Present.
Committee Member Chris Klein.
Present.
Committee Member Ton Rulon Miller.
Present.
And Committee Member Lee Heller. Absent. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item of business is the approval of our minutes from the December 11th, 2024 meeting.
Move approval.
I'll second that.
We don't need a roll call there, do we? Right?
We can just go all in favor.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
All opposed? Perfect. Motion carries. All right, next up is our agenda adjustments. Erin?
Yes, thanks. Chair, we have one adjustment today, the creek buffer ordinance item number 8, will be just not for action, it will be just for discussion. We're anticipating some changes to the draft, and so we will be coming back after the public comment period closes to share with the committee again.
Great, thanks for that. So next up is our public comment. So this is the opportunity for any members of the public to address this committee on any item that is not on the agenda. If you're here to speak to an item on the agenda, please fill out a speaker slip over there if you haven't already and hand that over to Stephanie. And they shared with me some guidelines for our public comment. So I mentioned the 2 minutes per speaker. And the speaker slips, when we'll call the names, and then you can step up to the podium right here, state your name, your address, and address your comments to the chair. This committee will not enter into dialogue at this time this evening. The purpose of the public comment portion of each agenda item is for you, members of the public, to inform the committee and share your views on topics under the jurisdiction of this committee. If members of the public have factual questions, city staff may be glad to address them. So we are joined here today by incredible members of the City of Santa Barbara's Creeks Division that can answer any questions. Are there any public comment on items not on the agenda? No. Do we need to check online or? For those of you online, you can raise your hand in Zoom, I believe, and she can identify you, and you'll just have to unmute yourself, and then you can speak when called upon. No comments online? Excellent. So we're moving on to item number 6, committee member and staff communications. Erin, or any committee members? Communications?
I don't have any, so if no committee members have any either, we can move on.
Excellent. Item number 7, subcommittee appointments, and this is an action item.
So every year we appoint a subcommittee for our budget subcommittee, and that's why it's on the agenda today. If anyone is interested in nominating anyone or nominating themselves.
And in the past, I believe the budget subcommittee is made up of the chair, the vice chair, and a past chair.
Yes.
Madam Chair, can I ask a clarification of the dates that we expect the review of the budget to occur? Which month and which dates generally are we expecting this?
Yes. So Committee Member Klein, the budget subcommittee usually meets in March.
And do we have specific dates yet? I have a couple of calendar conflicts in March and April. This is why, as past chair, I'm curious, so I don't want to volunteer for something that I'm not able to commit to.
Right. It's March 19th currently as our regularly scheduled meeting, but we could create a special meeting to change that time, right?
If it's necessary, I will be out of state for business on March 19th. So just as an FYI, and we can certainly go from there. As past chair, I certainly don't feel I have to be a part of the conversation. If you wanted to assign a different committee member, I have absolutely no problem with that, but I just wanted to let you know from my calendar schedule standpoint. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Committee members, Alelia Parento, Sustainability and Resilience Director. The budget won't be released until April, so we won't be able to review it with the CAC until April.
So it sounds like we have the composition. It's the current chair, current vice chair, and then past chair, given that we have a correction in timing. Is that?
Yeah, that sounds great. Do we need a motion? Yes. I believe so. I'd like to make the motion that the budget subcommittee consist of the current chair, vice chair, and the past chair.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposition? Motion carries. We have our budget subcommittee. All right, and moving on to business items. Our first item is the creek buffer ordinance, and we'll receive a presentation from city staff, Resilience Program Supervisor Melissa Hetrick, and Creeks Manager Aaron Markey. And I'll hand it over to you guys. Thanks so much.
Madam Chair, if I may interrupt, just need to recuse myself from this creek buffer item because my residence is adjacent to a major creek and is impacted by the ordinance. So just as an FYI, I will be an interested listener. Thank you.
I have a question about recusals. Being on another board at the federal level, those who must recuse due to conflict of interest are asked to leave. Oh, okay.
I'm going to sit over here with these fine folks.
So that my question still holds, are asked to leave the room for a number of reasons that have to do with our questions, deliberations, and such. So what is our standard for that with recusals?
Yes, the standard is to recuse yourself from the discussion, but also to leave the room to not potentially sway the discussion. I will ask for clarification, if they have comments as a member of the public, are they still not? Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
No worries, you all enjoy yourselves.
It's nice the days are getting a little longer. At least you have a little bit of light out there. And now we're all up to speed on the protocols too. So now that anyone that has to recuse themselves have stepped outside, I will hand it over again. Thanks again.
All right, thank you, Chair Owens. I'm actually going to turn it over to Melissa Hetrick, our Resilience Program Supervisor. Is that normal? Okay, sorry. Technical difficulties to kick off this presentation.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Melissa Hetrick, Resilience Program Supervisor, and I'm just one of a team of staff working on this project, including Aaron Markey, Allison DeBusk, our city planner, Brenda Belt in planning, and then Dan Henschke, our assistant city attorney. So today we're here to talk about draft creek buffer. Yeah, draft creek buffer ordinance. Next slide. So the benefits of creek buffers are that they reduce public safety risks associated from erosion and flooding from fast-moving creeks. They limit the need for channelization and other alteration of creeks. In addition, they enhance water quality and protect riparian and aquatic habitats and preserve scenic beauty. Next slide. So for those of you not familiar with creek buffers, it's essentially just a natural area between a new development and in the creek, as shown in this slide. So after undergoing a lengthy internal process of review on the draft ordinance, it was released for public comment in mid-January. The public comment period ends in March 10th. We sent out a mailer to everyone within the potential buffer area of the creeks. In addition, we noticed interested parties. We've already held one public open house on February 5th, which was very well attended. And then we've been holding a number of stakeholder meetings, and I really encourage any property owners or stakeholders or anyone interested in the ordinance to contact us, as we're happy to meet with you and talk about potential edits to the ordinance or concerns or answer questions. So that period is through March 10th. At that point, we will be revising the ordinance. We will bring it back here for a recommendation from Creeks Advisory Committee and Sustainability Council Committee. From there, it will start its official approval process. Because the ordinance does require a LCP amendment to be effective in the coastal zone, it requires a recommendation from Planning Commission, review by the Ordinance Committee, approval by City Council, and then it needs to be certified. The LCP amendment needs to be certified by the California Coastal Commission. So next slide. So diving into some background, this is a slide just kind of summarizing our existing buffer policies and regulations of the city. And this is really just talking about city regulations, not state or federal regulations related to buffers. The general plan currently directs establishment of minimum creek buffer regulations for new development and substantial redevelopment. Our municipal code does have a few sections related to creek setbacks. They predominantly regulate the grading and placement of structures and discharges in this creek itself. There is an existing required setback from Mission Creek only of 25 feet, and that was really put in place in the 60s as a safety precaution, given that Mission Creek's our biggest creek. When anybody comes in for a discretionary application, say design review or coastal permitting for a structure, they are required to undergo state CEQA compliance, which is environmental review. And as part of that, buffers from creeks are determined on a case-by-case basis currently. So what happens is people come in, applicants prepare technical reports, including geotech reports and hydrology reports and biological reports. And based on that, they confer with staff, and staff makes a recommendation to Planning Commission or other decision makers as to what the buffer should be on each parcel. Needless to say, this case-by-case process with no specific numbers or guarantees to applicants has been a source of frustration, I would say, all around. Applicants often say to us, just give us a number. Like, we just want to know the number. So part of the goals of this ordinance are really to have clear objective standards that everybody can look up and understand what's going on. In addition, when our housing element was just updated, because we don't have clear objective standards and it requires this case-by-case analysis, it was deemed an impediment to housing that we don't have clear objective hazard criteria. And so one of the policies in the housing element, actually for the purposes of ensuring housing, is to create an objective hazard and environmental protection standards to provide assurance and clarity to housing projects. So everybody's on the same page about what's required. Next slide. So because it was so burdensome to have this case-by-case analysis going on as part of the 2019 Coastal Land Use Plan update, we did put creek buffer regulations into that coastal plan. So the coastal plan serves as the standard of review for coastal development permits in the coastal zone. And so right now, when projects apply for coastal development permits, they are subject to a number of buffer regulations, one from top of bank of a creek and then another from environmentally sensitive habitat areas. And the proposed ordinance that we are looking at essentially mirrors the top of bank creek setbacks that are in the coastal land use plan. So those are 35 feet from public flood control projects and then 50 feet from major creeks. Next slide. So some of the goals of the proposed ordinance are to take the buffer regulations that were already certified in the coastal zone and bring them inland, make the whole city have the same standards. They would be applied citywide except for the airport area where very specific regulations relating to Goleta Slough and the wetlands there apply. One of the goals of the ordinance is that for it to be objective standards, that it can be applied ministerially at building permit process. We're hoping to have straightforward regulations that streamline permitting. We're really trying to maximize protections of the creek while avoiding takings of property. And we really want to encourage redevelopment to reduce safety risks. So in a lot of cases, especially downtown, we have a lot of structures that are very close to the creeks. And in the last few years, we have seen several of those structures compromised. So we really want to encourage people to redevelop so that they can move their structures further away from the creeks. In addition, we are committed to ensuring that our housing mandates are fulfilled, that the buffer distances can be achieved at most parcels, and that for those parcels that are severely constrained, that there's a modification process to reduce the buffers as needed. Next slide. So as we looked at developing the minimum buffer distances, a number of factors were considered. In 2000, there was a creeks inventory and assessment study that looked at all the different creeks in the city, erosion rates, and other assets associated with the creeks. So we that recommended a number of different buffer distances of different lengths that achieve different objectives. So, the minimum being safety, then water quality, then habitat. And so those buffer recommendations ranged from 50 feet all the way to 150 feet. And so when we looked at what buffer regulations to put in place, we really wanted to make sure that the regulations took into account our existing parcel configurations and the large amount of existing development that we have in these areas. And so we mapped every single creek and put 25 feet, 50 feet, 75 feet, 100 feet on each creek and counted the number of structures that were in those parcels. And in addition, looked at the ability of somebody to, when they go to completely rebuild or put in a new structure of the same size, could they put it outside the buffer? So we literally did that analysis with the aim of picking a buffer distance that could be achieved at most parcels in the city. And then we reviewed other jurisdictions. So all of the other jurisdictions in our region already have buffer ordinances, and most for a long time. Santa Barbara County's is 50 feet from in the urban areas and 100 feet in the rural. City of Goleta is a newer buffer that was put into place a few years ago. It's 100 feet. And City of Carpinteria is 50 feet, just as some of the examples. So the buffers we're proposing in the objective ordinance are 50 feet from top of bank for the major creeks, and those are listed in the ordinance and on this slide. 35 feet from public flood control project reaches, and those are listed on the slide. The idea here is that these are sections of creek in our most urban areas that where the banks have been protected. And so because these are very constrained areas of town, 35 feet is more appropriate because we see less erosion on those creeks because of the public flood control projects. And then anything that still meets the state definition of a creek, but which is not one of these major creeks, is considered a minor creek. And right now the ordinance proposes 15 feet from top of bank. So we've gotten a lot of questions about how we determined what was major public flood control and minor. And Ms. Markey can get into this in a bit more detail, but essentially we mapped the watershed or the area that drains into each creek. And if it was over a certain size, we assumed that the flow from that creek could be over a certain amount during a high rain event, and that was considered a major creek. And anything smaller than that was considered a minor creek. And again, public flood control projects are projects that we know about that either we maintain or Santa Barbara County maintains. So next slide. So this is just a screening map of the creeks. We've had a lot of questions about where this map came from. This was a creek layer that was created in the 1990s, surveyed in by, I believe, Penfield and Smith. It was based on topography. It's really just a screening map, especially with the minor creeks. We've seen a lot of changes to those drainages. In addition, several sections have been piped. The ordinance only applies to daylighted or above ground sections of creek. And so that's why it looks so disjointed, because it's only showing what at the time were daylighted sections of creeks. We've gotten a lot of comments from people like, hey, this map shows the minor creek in my area, but it's actually piped. We are making edits to the map as we get comments, so if people have those types of situations, please contact us. The map is not perfect. It was done a while ago, and we could not go on foot out to every site. So again, the ordinance applies to what is exhibiting characteristics of a creek and meets the creek definition in the field. The map is not in the ordinance. It is just a screening map for the purposes of public education and for people to know generally what applies. And so I'm going to hand it over to Ms. Markey to go through some of the details of the ordinance.
Thank you, Melissa. So yes, I'm going to walk through the major components of the ordinance, essentially. There are a number of definitions worth reading in the ordinance that clarify language we'll use, but top of bank determination, we have a new methodology to more objectively and clearly be able to determine the top of bank. So there's a number of different scenarios outlined in the ordinance, and these are the infographics that go along with that. The proposed ordinance would be placed in Title 22 with our other environmental policies. We would actually repeal the existing Mission Creek ordinance, as this would replace that. It applies to new development and substantial redevelopment, and we can talk more about that, but the threshold for substantial redevelopment. And then I'm going to go through each of these sections a little bit more. So existing non-conforming development, so existing legal development someone may have on their property can continue to be maintained and repaired. Additions would be allowed if they are located outside of the buffer. Changes of use, interior remodels, all sorts of different interior remodeling that just does not reach the definition of substantial redevelopment would be allowed. So I think, it's a threshold of basically 50% of the structural components of the structure. And then we have a section of things that are just allowed without any advanced approval. And these include, flood conveyance, debris removal, vegetation maintenance for fuel modification around existing structures as required for fire clearance, planting of native plants, as well as maintenance repair of a number of different things, existing legal things.
I'll just point out here too, just because this has been a source of confusion, these are just some of the things that are allowed. We haven't put, in all these allowed uses slides, we have not listed every single thing that's in the ordinance. We're just giving you a sampling.
Yes, so allowed in buffers with what's called a zoning clearance. This is essentially for a ministerial permit that would be approved at building. Those projects would go through a zoning review. And so these are things that a staff level approval could be given for. So things like signs and lighting, fencing, minor kind of improvements within the buffer, as well as stormwater improvements, specifically called out what those could be and where they can be located, and ADA improvements when no other location is available on the site. And then we have a whole process for public development projects. So these are large projects, you know, a flood control capacity improvement project, as well as maintenance repair of existing roads and utilities and things like that. That would be done through Public Works Director approval. And then standards applicable to all developments. So these would apply to any work within the creek or the creek buffer area that, you know, substantial alteration would not be allowed of the creek itself unless there was no less environmentally damaging property or alternative. So this would come into play in, for example, in like a flood control capacity project. Encroachments into the creek buffer are minimized. If bank stabilization is needed, that other alternatives for bioengineering and more softer bank stabilization techniques are used when feasible, and that the development, whatever is proposed, would be safe for the life of the structure and not worsen flooding or erosion. And then there's a process outlined for applying for a modification, as Melissa alluded to, if you are on a severely constrained lot where you don't have the space to redevelop outside the buffer. And it's outlined in the ordinance, but essentially if you have an existing structure, you can redevelop to get at least that square footage. And if it's a vacant lot, it's outlined what you're allowed to get to, which, I mean, there's very few vacant lots, but 1,200 square feet and an additional accessory structure. And then there's a process for private bank stabilization when that may be necessary to alleviate an emergency to an existing legal structure that's threatened. And there's a process outlined there, as well as state mandated priority housing projects. So in all these cases, there's limits on the amount of development. There's requirements for technical reports, so that safety findings can be made that whatever is being proposed is safe from erosion for the life of the structure, and that the finding can be made that whatever's proposed is as far away as possible. So there's other modifications for front yard setbacks and side yard setbacks in order to achieve the greatest distance from the creek as possible. Did you want to do this?
Sure. So with regard to accessory dwelling units and housing, this is another area we've had a lot of questions. There's an entire section in the ordinance addressing ADUs because there's a lot of state rules about ADUs. But ADUs are allowed outside the buffer. If state mandated ADUs can't fit outside the buffer, they are allowed inside the buffer with a geologist report addressing safety. They just have to be located as far as possible from the creek. Similarly, in multifamily housing zone properties, the housing can be built to the unit densities that are currently allowed. If that density cannot fit outside the buffer, then a modification can be obtained to achieve that density on site, assuming that a geologist report can recommend a lesser buffer that's still where we can still make safety findings.
Okay, and so we've done some initial mapping, as Melissa alluded to as well, to look at the number of parcels affected. So of the total parcels within the city, there's about 27,000. Citywide, there's about 2,300 within these proposed buffers citywide. These rules, as Melissa already pointed out, take effect already within the coastal zone. So within the inland, it's about 2,000 parcels, or about 8% of city parcels overall. We did do some, pretty extensive looking at what parcels might meet that, what we're using the term severely constrained lot, which isn't really, but could not basically get their existing square footage redeveloped outside, and it's about 40 parcels. I'll let Melissa.
Yeah, so since January, we've received a number of public comments and questions and talked to a number of stakeholders. And so I just wanted to relay kind of what those questions have predominantly been and what the comments have been to date, so that the committee is aware. We have a lot of questions about existing structures, a lot of confusion about whether the ordinance applies to existing structures, and we've been trying to clarify that existing structures that are legal can be maintained and repaired and remodeled, that the ordinance really applies to new development and substantially redeveloped structures. There's been a lot of questions about minor creeks, and it's interesting because they've been kind of the full gamut. Either their support for the ordinance because they have been having drainage issues associated with like neighbors putting stuff in the drainage and then it redirects flow onto their property. There has been concerns that the drainages are too small to be considered creeks. And that the ordinance will limit accessory structures like sheds and things like that. Concerns with determining the top of bank on minor creeks, and this is something we're really taking a close look at, in addition to uses along these minor creeks, because it is hard to determine the top of bank on some of these minor creeks. And so we are looking at potential remedies for that to make it easier, either taking the setback from the center line of the creek or some other method. So we're really open to comments on that. A lot of questions about rebuilding after natural disasters. So the current ordinance after a natural disaster, if you rebuild outside the buffer, you can get whatever square footage you're currently allowed by zoning. But if you are on one of these constrained lots or your existing structure was within a buffer, the current ordinance does state that after a natural disaster, we'd want to see the new structure built outside the buffer if it could be, but you would still be entitled to at least your existing square footage. And so if you had to reduce the buffer to obtain the previous square footage that you had, that would be allowed with safety findings. This is another area where we've received a lot of comments about, well, is it the same if it was destroyed by a flood or an erosion versus wildfire or fire? And so that's something we are taking a look at and would love to hear input about, open to changes in that section. We've also had a lot of questions about impacts to flood and fire insurance rates. So currently, flood insurance is determined based on your location on FEMA flood maps, and the elevation those FEMA flood maps show potential flooding to be at your property. There's, I guess, a distinction that most people don't understand is there's the threat of erosion from creeks, which this ordinance is predominantly addressing, and then there is when an area floods and water just seeps into and fills up areas. So flood insurance is based on both of those factors, but they're based on these federally mapped maps, and if you flood proof above the what's called base flood elevation, then you get that is required as part of your insurance for flood insurance. So this ordinance doesn't impact those flood insurance maps or the regulations associated with FEMA flood insurance. In addition, there's been a lot of question about fire insurance and wildfire. So in the allowed uses in the current ordinance is you are allowed to do vegetation maintenance required for fire protection purposes. In addition, we believe they're already covered, but this is another area where we're going to really do some clarification that any home hardening that is recommended for wildfire areas be exempt activities. I think most of them would be anyways, because they're things like changing your roof materials and things like that. And then we've heard a lot of concerns about how this might affect property values. Again, a clarification that this doesn't change allowed uses on a property or zoning standards or number of units allowed. But there are a lot of concerns about that I'm sure you'll hear from people today. And then we've heard a lot of support for the creek buffer ordinance to reduce hazards, especially given the last 2 years we've gotten a lot of emails about this. In addition, support for protection of our creek habitats and those open areas in our city. We've had a lot of complaints about neighbor activities in or near creeks affecting people's property. Next slide. You can see we've had a lot of comments. But I just want to make sure they're heard because some people aren't here. And then we've had a lot of requests, and we especially appreciate requests because they are things we can look at to potentially, as we're looking at the ordinance, but especially if they're specific. But the requests really range the gamut. So requests for more uses in the buffer. So people want to be able to do gardens, patios. Right now there's restrictions on fence types in the ordinance, so that's something we're taking another look at. Requests to be able to do other types of minor development, requests for additions in the buffers that the ordinance currently doesn't allow, and then people requesting to be able to reconstruct accessory structures. On the flip side of things, we have requests to have fewer uses in the buffers, so less development in the buffers, and so that goes both ways. We have requests to change the definition of feasible to be stricter so that the allowed encroachments into the buffer are stricter. We've had requests for larger creek buffers and smaller creek buffers. And then we've had a lot of requests for the city or county to maintain the creeks on people's properties, install flood control measures, and assist in that regard. So I think that's not every single thing we've heard, but those are the major categories. So again, just getting back to this slide, as far as next steps, again, really wanting to hear from interested parties. So we'll put up our contact information after this, but really hoping people will reach out to us to discuss the ordinance, and we can talk about any potential edits and comments people may have. And then, as I mentioned, after we edit the ordinance, we'll be going back through these committee reviews. So next slide. So we have an entire website on the creek buffer ordinance. The map is on there. You can type in your address and take a look at how close you might be to a potential creek. In addition, there's FAQ, so frequently asked questions on there, and the ordinance itself. It also, there's a way to sign up for notifications for any of the meetings. If you have any comments or questions, you can email creekbuffers@santabarbaraca.gov. In addition, feel free to contact any of the three of us on the screens, and we're happy to answer your comments. Next slide. So with that, our recommendation today is really that the Creeks Advisory discuss and provide comments on the proposed ordinance. So this is a different recommendation than what was in your agenda. So I'm actually going to, let's go back a slide so that people can get the contact information if needed. So that ends our staff presentation.
Great. Well, thank you, Melissa and Aaron, for that very thorough presentation. And I want to also thank you for all the great resources available on the website. There's an extensive FAQ, all kinds of information, questions, and answers, and a lot of great resources available. So this portion, what we're going to do first is we will have the committee discussion and an opportunity for the committee to ask questions. And then we'll go to public comment of folks in person. So again, if you haven't submitted a slip, you have one final chance. I have the slips in my hand here. And then we'll give an opportunity for any folks who have comments online to provide those comments online. So for now, I'd like to check in with our fellow Creeks Advisory Committee members and see if there's any questions or comments.
I had one question of Ms. Markey. On slide 17, you have substantial alteration of creeks prohibited except where no other feasible, less environmentally damaging alternative. What?
Yes, great question. Through the chair, Owens, committee member Monet, the intent here is that alternatives like softer bank approaches be looked at over concrete or rock riprap or things that would be considered bank hardening.
Great, thank you.
Chair.
Well, I'll just add in, committee member, that a lot of these findings come right out of the Coastal Act, and because they're going to be applied in the coastal zone. So we understand that it's legalese language, but we are working on trying to make them more public friendly.
Thank you.
Yes, Chair Gaskin.
Thank you. First of all, I really praise the staff for embracing this issue with your characteristic professionalism, clarity of purpose, and doing so recognizing we're way behind the ball on this. Just comparing it with County, Goleta, Carp, I'm so pleased that we're finally able to recognize that we need established protocols and established quantitative aspects to our buffers. So thank you. Thank you also for your outreach and your process. It's very strong, and I just really wish to applaud what's coming forward. I, too, had a concern about slide 17, as my fellow commissioner did, and my concern had to do, I even circled it with the word feasible. I'm glad to see it was on the public comments as well. It sounds incredibly squishy to me, and I hope that we are very clear and frankly very constrained about how we define feasibility and feasible. And I also had a question on slide 19. And slide 19, it states in the second bullet, if state mandated ADUs can't fit outside outside buffer, they are allowed inside buffer with geologist report. And I suspect that's coming from state law. Is that right?
Yes, so there's certain types of ADUs that unless there's a documented safety hazard, that we have to allow no matter what. And yeah, and so if they can make the safety findings and it can't be located outside the buffer, then we would allow it as within the buffer, but as far back as possible.
I see.
As a matter of procedure, I just recommend, I would recommend that the committee limit its discussion right now to questions and then do comments after the public comment.
Thank you. Okay, so that helped me understand 19. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks for that question. Committee member Ann?
My question is also around like 17, 18, 19. regarding the finding of safety, I was just wondering how that addresses the possibility that climate change will affect flooding in the future, because I know that there are already areas of Santa Barbara that are affected by flooding now, and what I would be concerned about trying to avoid is areas where housing gets built and maybe it doesn't flood now, but with storms increasing in frequency or in severity, it might be flooding like 20 years down the line. Is that being addressed in the standards for deciding what's considered safe?
Through the chair. So when somebody is making a finding of safety, this is mostly in cases where there's development being proposed within the buffer for various reasons. So for the modification process we were talking about, and so we're not sure if it's safe, so we need to have that demonstrated to us. The technical report will look at the soil structure of that area, we'll look at the orientation of the creek in that area and the projected flows. Right now, that analysis would be done with historical rainfall data. And so as part of our adaptation program, though, we are looking at how changes in rainfall patterns are affecting flows in the city. And so one of our bigger initiatives is to model that and look at resulting levels of flooding and whether we need to adjust our floodplain regulations, so how high we're flood proofing, particularly south of Highway 101. But that is a future effort, and right now there is, in our opinion, not enough. It would be burdensome to do a downscale of climate modeling for every technical report that is needed. But if we, out of that study, find that erosion rates are increasing, by whatever percentage or whatever it might be, we could look at potential changes then. But for now, we're doing the best with the information we have now.
I'll do him and then come back to you.
I have one quick question. As we move towards rules and conclusion, which is great, and yet there are questions now, and we're trying to qualify and clarify verbs, adjectives, and numbers, which is tough. How will we provide customer service to the citizens of Santa Barbara with their questions? How will Creeks Division do that, or will the city do that, or how do they get answers after rules are applied?
Yes, through the chair, I can answer that, as these projects are reviewed, it's part of their project review. There's planner staff over in community development that assist with that, but additionally, the Creeks Division staff that get involved in reviewing creek setback projects are more than happy to meet with applicants and talk through their specific cases.
Thanks. And then committee member Stephanie?
It's just a nitpicky thing, the term geologist. So I'm a licensed professional geologist, but I'm also a licensed engineering geologist, which means I can focus on water. But geologist is a big term. I mean, there's structural geologists, there's all sorts of geologists. I saw geologists, I thought, just a comment.
So in the ordinance, it does specify what kind of
Okay.
just is needed. We were bringing it down to the 8th grade level, but yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
Great. Any additional questions from the committee at this point? All right, great. Thanks for all those excellent questions and answers. And we'll move now to our public comment in person. And I just want for the record to note that there was one public comment submitted in writing online by Steve Fort. So that's available in the public record. And then we will first up hear from Jarrett. You may please approach the podium. You have 2 minutes. Jarrett will be followed by, I think, is it Skylar or Nathan? I was trying to just read first names, but Skylar. Okay, by Skylar, you'll be next.
Yeah, good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Jarrett Gorin from Vanguard Planning. I'm a land use planner. Also, I live next to a minor creek, so this affects me personally. This ordinance, it turns property owners into lawbreakers. In a lot of cases, the proposed buffers wipe out huge portions of your property, and in some cases, it's your entire property. And if you're unlucky enough to live near a creek, you can't do typical things that everybody has a reasonable expectation to do on their property, like put a patio in your backyard or plant a flower bed. Unless something is expressly permitted by the ordinance, it's prohibited. And virtually nothing is permitted in these buffers. So even things which don't require a permit from the city are prohibited. And no normal person sits there and thinks, I need to review the municipal code to make sure I can plant this vegetable garden in my backyard. But if you plant one in a creek buffer, you're breaking the law. This ordinance violates at least 2 state housing laws. It violates SB 330, which says that a city can't impose or enforce new design standards on housing projects that unless they're objective. And what this does is it establishes new ways that the city can use subjective and discretionary standards to deny housing projects. It also violates ADU law. ADU law says that certain types of ADUs have to be allowed ministerially, that no combination of local standards can prohibit them. And this ordinance establishes basically a discretionary process for those, where you have to do tons of technical studies, which cost thousands of dollars, and then the director of community development has to make 6 findings to approve your ADU, and 4 of those are based on subjective judgment by Creeks and the director. And when you're talking about things like modifications and findings, that's discretionary planning language. That isn't what you get into when you're talking about objective standards. So that's really problematic. This probably also would put the city out of compliance with the housing element. It doesn't streamline anything. It does the opposite. They claim it's going to streamline review, and I am out of time, and I'm going to respect your time.
Thank you for your comment. Skylar, and Skylar will be followed by Nicole.
Skylar Nathan, I live at 276 Cannon Drive. Since safety is mentioned many times in the proposed creek buffer ordinance, I'm going to focus my 2 minutes on that. If the creek buffer ordinance is enacted as written, I would assert that not only is safety not going to improve, the most likely outcome is that it would actually go down. I have on my property a stick-built 90s era 2-car garage that sits roughly 15 feet from Arroyo Burro Creek in the heart of San Roque. I would not in a million years bet a single dollar that structure would survive a flooding event. This is not a hypothetical. We've seen that creeks in this region can flood with deadly results. There is nowhere on my property where I can place a garage structure that is not inside the proposed buffer. By removing the opportunity entirely for that structure to ever be replaced with something built to a greater engineering standard, you're not in any way going to improve safety. The incentive structure you're creating with this ordinance encourages homeowners to hold on to aging structures built to lesser standards indefinitely. That does not make anyone safer. Furthermore, let's not be naive here. If you give homeowners no legal route to improve their property, a significant portion will elect to improve their property illegally. This goes to what Jarrett was saying. I'm not condoning this. I'm just pointing out that it's an obvious unintended consequence of the proposed ordinance. When homeowners illegally improve their property, they do so in the absence of engineering. Why spend money on engineering when you're not even going to pay for a permit? So the creek buffer ordinance, as written, will incentivize 2 behaviors: the preservation of outdated structures built to old standards and the creation of illegal structures built to no standard at all. These outcomes do not make anyone safer. You're asking homeowners to give up an incredible amount, and you're offering them nothing in return. It's worth asking if this ordinance will even accomplish its stated goals. I say it will not. Thank you for your time.
Nicole? Nicole will be followed by Chris.
Hi, I'm Nicole Bergiol. I work with SEP's Land Use Consulting. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration of the proposed ordinance changes tonight. As you know, along with residential and commercial properties, our cities has museums, gardens, and other educational institutions sited along the creeks that will be affected by the buffer increase and ordinance changes. As a land use planner advising local institutions with property along major creeks, I'm interested in how the proposed changes, specifically the increased buffer and project review processes, may impact these institutions' maintenance of existing infrastructure and planned improvements in the increased buffer area. Nonprofits and public serving institutions have to conduct careful and long-term planning and fundraising for improvements to their facilities and campuses. These improvements ensure public safety, accessibility, and that the institutions can continue to offer relevant and impactful services to the public in safe, modernized facilities. I ask that your committee consider the impacts of the proposed buffer increase and changes to the project review process to our local institutions that happen to be located along creeks and waterways. I've reviewed the ordinance and appreciate the sections that allow for maintenance of existing nonconforming development, improvements on private property and buffer areas for safety, accessibility, circulation, educational, and public access purposes with a zoning clearance or a modification. But the increase from a 25-foot to a 50-foot buffer along major creeks encompasses a lot of the existing development in some of these properties, in fact, most of it. Perhaps a carve-out for existing educational institutions identified as community priority or for community benefit, exempting or streamlining review would be appropriate. I appreciate your consideration, and I'm available to discuss these ideas with staff and the committee. Thank you.
And Chris will be followed by Susan?
Good evening. Chris Dahlstrom, 424 North Ontario Road. Our property is on San Roque Creek. In fact, we've been there for 37 years. My relatives, since 1953, built the house. A lot has changed in the creek area as far as the geomorphology and the floodway of the creeks. By experience and trade, I'm a hydrogeologist. I'm also a fluvial geomorphologist, and I ran a public agency for 25 years over in San Ynez that dealt with the San Ynez River, and also worked here and county water agency. So I've got over 33 years of experience with creeks and rivers and the morphology of those waterways. After looking at the slides, and I see that there are a number of questions on both sides, a number of comments on both sides. I contacted Melissa early on. I received this notice on January 30th. So if things were going on January 15th, we had, as residents, had no idea until we got them in the mail on the 30th, with a workshop on the 5th. So there wasn't many business days. And as a public servant and being a general manager of a water agency, it was our due diligence to give people adequate and substantial notification and involvement in anything that took place, whether it was policy, ordinance, or any changes in any kind of governmental action. So I ask that more time is given on this so we can have public involvement. Public interaction is really important. I heard staff say we can contact them individually. That doesn't go very far because that's the divide and conquer method. It's better to have public input, better to have public involvement, and I'm sorry for the 2 minutes.
All right, we have Susan, will be followed by Richard.
Thank you very much. Susan Pate, 1840 Eucalyptus Hill Road. Thank you, Melissa and Aaron, for having me today. I'll look forward to our meeting on Friday. What the Resiliency and Creek Department may not be aware of is the long-standing behind-the-ball negligence of the city of Santa Barbara. Flood control and streets. The rain runoff, the sewage pipes that burst into our neighborhood, the tributary, the water storage overflowing on Cedar Lane, rainwater coming down Barker Pass, missing all the drains, which I think are 2, because the city placed the drains in the wrong area because no one studied it. There's little proper adequate drainage in any of the neighborhoods. The other item that you may not know is that a tiny 5x7 postcard with tiny printing on it mailed to the city residents saying your property may be affected by a new proposed creek buffer ordinance, and see this map, may not go over well with tax-paying property owners. Natural creeks and habitats should be harmonious with stewards of the land. If you are spearheading this agreement, please look to the city of Santa Barbara to solve the flooding issues first and foremost. Then ask the public for their input, know the land and the steward you are trying to set back, and then listen and adjust your plans. Thank you.
Richard will be followed by Cameron.
All right, good evening, everyone. Richard Lloyd from Capello and Noel. I'm here on behalf of my boss, Barry Capello, who has a house up on Campanile, and I think he's had some emails with city staff. Shall I start again? All right. Okay, Richard Lloyd from Capello and Noel, a law firm here in town, here on behalf of my boss, Barry Capello. He's the managing partner, and he owns a property up on Campanile Drive. Particularly interested in the Minor Creek issue. I think a few points. One is that what I saw there is that the definition of a minor creek and the analysis of it seems to be based on decades-old studies, and the city itself isn't clear on where the minor creeks are, which properties are affected, and I believe in other communications it's been mentioned that they'll assess what these minor creeks are based on ground conditions at the time. So there's an inherent uncertainty there in terms of how to even know where these minor creeks are, or if the properties are affected, or if people even know that they have a minor creek. There was reference to some of the other land use ordinances. One thing that's clear is from looking at those neighboring cities' ordinances, none of them are as expansive that include this kind of minor creek definition. They all limit themselves in some way, either through defined floodplain drainages, whether it's a drainage that's specifically noted on the map, and even Santa Barbara's general plan, when it talks about creeks, it talks about creeks on the map that everyone knows and thinks of as creeks, and not these drainage ditches that are in the back of a property that someone might later learn all the time has been a minor creek. So there was a question about what to do. I think that the easiest thing for the city, just put a line through the minor creek. It's unnecessary, it's a minefield. It's a buzzsaw if the property owners start getting involved, and it's really just not necessary at this point. At minimum, I think the city needs to do more, and it has a burden to show that these minor creeks do exist, to give homeowners notice, and to go from there.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
And Cameron?
Good evening, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Cameron Benson, and I am here tonight to speak in support of the city's goals, both their environmental goals and public safety goals, in presenting this ordinance, and also to speak in favor of the proposed ordinance. A creek buffer ordinance has been part of the city's general plan for over a decade. And there's specific guidance offered in the general plan from the city council to staff, and it appears to me that the staff is following those guidelines in the preparation of this proposed ordinance. Every time the city's general plan has been updated over at least the last decade, maybe 2 decades, whether it's environmental resources element or the housing element, the environmental review documents for those updates, the EIRs have been prepared, have called for a creek buffer ordinance as a way to mitigate the development that's being allowed in those general plan updates. So it's a really important compensation for, in some cases, development that's already occurred in the city. The city enacted this ordinance that we're talking about tonight in the coastal zone in 2019. I haven't heard about problems associated with that. That's been in place now 6 years. All of the other jurisdictions, as mentioned in the presentation, in our area from the city of Goleta, city of Carpinteria, and Santa Barbara County have all had these ordinances in place for years. So it's time for the city of Santa Barbara to catch up with that. I want to thank the staff. This obviously is a complex issue. They've done a lot of research and a lot of balancing to try to present what's in front of you tonight. So, so I want to thank them for that. And I do support making sure that any modification to the buffer area is very narrow. So I strongly support the ordinance, and I hope you do too. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes our in-person comments. And Stephanie, do we have any folks online that would like to provide comment?
Yes, we have a hand raised. Steve Johnson, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Mute. Did I unmute?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, committee members, for your public service. I've submitted written comments, apparently not in time to get to you, but perhaps they'll be part of the record. I generally support the comments made by Jared Gorin and others like him. I'll just focus briefly on two aspects. One is the top of bank determination. That is based on language that is 45 years old, that was culled from the county of Santa Barbara's top of bank determination process. 45 years is a long time. Hydrology has come a long way in 45 years. They couldn't do things 45 years ago that they can do now trivially, such as determining floodplain extents and, more importantly, floodway. The city has a long way to go in determining its floodway. If a floodway was properly determined, that would be your objective standard for top of bank. I do want to note that the 45-year-old language leads to absurd results. It can locate the top of bank outside of the floodplain. Anybody that accepts that kind of determination would fit in well back in the days when it was declared that the earth was flat. So please reconsider the determination of top of bank. And again, I do not think that the proposed ordinance conforms with SB 330, and I would like to see a legal opinion from the city attorney's office that says otherwise. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Stephanie, were there any others online? No. All right. Since this item was changed to a discussion item, and we've concluded our public comment, I just wanted to give the opportunity for any follow-up questions or comments from the Creeks Advisory Committee at this time. This will be revisiting the committee for discussion and action at a future date. Right.
Yeah, just thank you for your thoughtful comments.
Yeah, thanks everyone for engaging. Stay engaged. Reach out to the city staff if you have further questions or comments. All right, with that, we will move to item 8B, Clean Streets, Clean Seas Research Project. We have an update from Jill Murray, Creek Supervisor. Thanks again, everyone, for participating in the public process today.
Thank you for sticking around. We're good to proceed.
Excellent. Welcome back, Chris. And thank you, Jill. We look forward to hearing an update from you.
This is a chance to spend just a few minutes more than is typical talking to you about our Clean Streets, Clean Seas research project, because I'm usually folding it into a presentation that's tackling a lot of other topics. And it's just an update. This is a grant-funded project, and we were funded from NOAA's National Sea Grant Marine Debris Competition. Marine debris includes macro trash, but also microplastic, and it's a $1.2 million grant that goes to several different agencies, and the money that came to the city is mostly going towards contracted work. And then Measure B is also providing a $50,000 match, or provided already a $50,000 match towards one of the contracts. And this has a lot of relevance towards NOAA's marine debris program, also California's microplastic strategy, and California's trash amendment. The results will be used by people that are working on all of those programs. And I will, the project team, it's a big group, and a lot of us are working on separate sub-studies, but the City of Santa Barbara is working very closely with UCSB, and in particular the laboratory of Dr. Trish Holden and the Materials Research Laboratory. And we're also working closely with Cascade Water Resources, and then other partners that are doing kind of their own work that we will integrate together are San Francisco Estuary Institute, the Moore Institute for Plastic Pollution Research, WSP, and we're also working really closely with USC Sea Grant. Okay, just to get the definition out there, microplastics are less than 5 millimeters. Most of the microplastics that we hear about causing environmental damage are a lot smaller than that. So I would say under 2 millimeters are the ones that are studied most and described most. They can come from so many sources. There's primary microplastics, such as pellets that are used to produce larger material. More commonly, it's secondary microplastics, which are breakdown products of larger particles. I want to point out on the diagram on the left, the tire, because tire wear particles, so broken down pieces of tire, are starting to become one of the most concerning categories of microplastics. And then also even breakdown of road particles, and then a mishmash of tire particles with road particles is starting to be seen in studies. And so the definition of the plastic includes these polymers that are added. So a street reslurring, for example, could have asphalt, and then it has water, and then emulsifier and polymers to help that bind. And so when that breaks down, that can become considered a plastic particle. Okay, so studies were done not that long ago, and just in time for us to apply for this grant, showing that runoff from impervious surfaces really dominates transport to the aquatic environment. And that was pretty a surprise. People thought that wastewater treatment plants and wind deposition would be the larger sources, but it turns out that stormwater and creek and urban runoff is picking up most of the microplastics that are making it to the coastal ocean. And studies have been done modeling kind of how concentrations and supplies are increasing over time, and that marine ecosystems will be harmed, and they have some models showing where and when. We know that impervious surfaces are increasing throughout the country. The long-term solutions for microplastic pollution are things like source control, true source control, like product bans, and so many people are working on great research efforts, including some efforts that are funded by the same group that funded us to develop more plant-based polymers and things that once they break down won't be forever products. And producer responsibility, increasing infiltration, because we know that infiltration, BMPs, or just increased permeability can, for better or for worse, collect microplastics in the soil before it does run off to creeks and the ocean. Those are all decades-long improvement projects. But right now, we've got a lot of microplastic on street surfaces, and so we have to figure out what to do about that, if there's anything that we can do. And then we also have the trash amendment, which is a huge effort on all jurisdictions, parts throughout California, and that is targeting trash larger than 5 millimeters. So we need to know if, in parallel, if we can also target trash or microplastic smaller than 5 millimeters. And so we really wanted to, we did a pilot study and we wanted to follow that up. Can street sweeping itself remove microplastic from street surfaces? And I've talked to you about that. So just going to review some of the objectives of our grant, the ones that, especially that the city is working on. So first is to determine if street sweeping can actually intercept a sizable fraction, some fraction of the amount of microplastic that is being discharged from creeks. Second is in a more controlled study, can we demonstrate that street sweeping is picking up microplastic? Because we're missing that mechanism in the first objective. And I'll stop here and say there are, in the California microplastic strategy, research was cited that suggested street sweeping would not be very effective in picking up the small microplastic particles, because there have been some studies that have shown that street sweeping is not always effective in picking up small sediment grains. I think it was, it's cited too narrow of a group of the literature, but also it's a great hypothesis to test. The people that have street sweepers think it's, of course, they're going to pick up microplastic because it's less dense than most sediment. Academics think maybe not, so that's why we are going after this. And then a third objective is a simulated rainfall, and I've shown you some of those results, so I'm not going to go into that much. This is being conducted by Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, and this is the one that we kicked in. They already had an established project. It was great. We added the microplastic analysis. And so that final, well, and so I'll skip that. And then the fourth big science study is whether the trash capture devices that are put inside catch basins can remove, and they have 5 millimeter screens, can they remove microplastic or actually even generate microplastic from jostling around a bunch of bottles, et cetera? I'm not going to talk about that one today because we're not working on that one at all. Okay, so year one it's a 3-year grant. It will probably have to be extended a bit, but year one was contracting dry weather sampling, getting an advisory group going, which USC grant managed, and finalizing our sampling plans. Then year two, doing our sampling and laboratory analysis, and year three, a little bit more sampling, data analysis, and then synthesizing. So more detail, the progress that we, the city, made in year one, we awarded all our contracts, and getting all of that contracting language can be challenging. We completed, or SQUIRP completed, that shouldn't say objective one, I'm sorry, that should say objective 3. They completed their study, and that was the simulated rainfall, and they showed that it supported the role of street sweeping in being able to reduce microplastics in actual simulated runoff. Simulated meaning a physical simulation, not a computer model. We convened the technical advisory group, and we have people that are involved in regulations, and their interest is that there are TMDLs throughout the state and probably the country that give credit for street sweeping to reduce pollutant loads by 5 to 10%, and there really isn't a scientific basis for that yet. And so that is one of the reasons why those regulators want to join the technical advisory group and let us know how we can make our study as valuable to them as possible. We have networked with other researchers. We got really lucky. Serendipitously saw a report that showed there's actually a huge research flume on campus. This is new at UCSB, and there was also a large microplastic study being taken on there. So we went and visited and met those researchers and got a lot of valuable information for our project. Finalized our sampling methodologies, and a lot of this was trial and error, both for collecting from the street sweeper debris and creek sampling. And then we started our dry weather sampling in the creeks. Now we're in year 2, and that final report for the SQUIRP study has been done, and that is available online. It's really interesting. And then we've continued our dry weather sampling, and really, I'm very excited to say we completed our storm sampling, because in a potential drought year, that could be really dicey. And not just drought, but vacations and all those things that can get in the way of storm sampling. And we completed that. And then we're in the middle of our planning for our objective 3. I'll go into more details. So this is just pulling back the curtain on that objective 1. How do we actually get numbers that say whether street sweeping could be potentially effective for intercepting microplastic? And so this is a map of Mission Creek in purple and street sweeper routes. This is Lower Mission Creek. And so we are sampling at Rocky Nook, which is the upper star, and at Gutierrez, which is the lower star. Between these two is where almost every street is street swept. And above, there's almost no street sweeping. And so what we'll do is we'll, by difference, we'll know how much microplastic entered the creek during those. So that is our load that is entering the creek from that Lower Mission Creek watershed. And then we will also be sampling street sweeper debris, and we will extrapolate to what's the total amount of microplastics removed by street sweepers. And so the left arrow is what is being discharged from the creek. The right arrow is what's removed by street sweeper. Basically, how do those arrows compare? If we know we're removing some microplastic from street sweeping, maybe it's 0.001% of what's being discharged. And then we're not going to really keep talking about street sweeping as a potential interception tool. So it's really like a comparison of order of magnitude estimates of these two numbers. Our grant proposal, and then this was reviewed by our technical advisory committee, was to sample 3 storms, small, medium, and large, and do 2 time points for each site. So we're trying to get like an average wet weather concentration, and then we have our 3 dry dates. Microplastic samples are hard to analyze, so we only get 18 samples to use, and this is what we decided would be the best way to use them. Every time we sample, we pump about 100 liters and then filter it, and the filter gets delivered to UCSB. And then for the street sweeper debris, 4 dates, a total of 12 samples. And this is the size fraction that we are studying, which we've pulled from the literature of how other studies have been run. So this was our plan. The plan on the left kind of shows the hydrograph of a full year. So you've got, this was 2018. The upper one was Rocky Nook, and the lower one was Lower Mission Creek. A lot of dry weather punctuated by storms. And so the purple bars are 3 dry weather samples, and then the red is the small, medium, and large sample that we're trying, small, medium, and large storm that we're trying to sample. And then on the right kind of shows what that looks like on a single storm. So we're trying to get a composite sample as the hydrograph is rising, and then a composite sample as the hydrograph, basically after it stopped raining and the hydrograph is tapering off. Are we still seeing microplastic in those sections? And upper watershed, lower watershed, and then by subtraction what came in. And we'll base, once we have the results of those, that will inform how we do our calculations for what the overall discharge is per year. This is to show that the pumping, you pump water from the creek and then pump it through that stack of sieves and deliver that stack to UCSB. Once that's delivered to UCSB, they have to do density separations. They basically float the microplastic up. Then they have to digest all of the organic material, which there's a lot of plant material. Then they filter it. Then they do a microscopic visual analysis, size, shape, and color. And then they use infrared analysis and techniques I'm not going to discuss to look at the fingerprint to know what actual type of plastic those particles make up. And I don't have a slide for this, so I'm just going to jump in here. Our grant helped fund the purchase of something called OPTIR, and it's now installed in the Materials Research Laboratory, and it was produced by a local company called Photothermal Spectral Corporation, and it should really help so many different research projects. But if UCSB is to become kind of a center for the microplastic research, that equipment will really help. And we didn't fund it entirely. It's very, very expensive, but the grant paid for some of that. Okay, this is the reminder to talk about that flume and how this is at UCSB. This is, it's actually 45 feet long. It's huge. And they were dumping lots of microplastic in and getting the current up and going. And then they're studying how different sampling methods down into the water affect the results. And so we were able to learn from that. We cannot just throw our tubing over the side of the bridge. We have to make sure we're integrating it vertically. So we're up and down and right to left. So that meant we couldn't just leave our pumps going while we're not there. That's okay. So this is what it was. This is us kind of trying to perfect our methods. This was in dry weather. One thing that we learned from some of those researchers, and then it just kind of catalyzed our own thinking, is we now put the sieves inside that barrel of the pump that you can see on the left. And this is great because we used to have to have a blank, like an empty pan, and it would sit there for an hour while we were pumping, and it would get a lot of microfibers deposited on it. About 5 to 10% of what we were actually measuring in the creek in dry weather. So we are all breathing this stuff. And now our sample is protected though. So, and then this is, so we've kind of moved things around. We cover our auto samplers, we lock them up with this upside down trash can, and we are able to leave the auto sampler out, staged, ready to go, and then we drive back and forth between Gutierrez and Rocky Nook. We were, in the last storm, probably back and forth about 15 times. And let's see, what else was I going to say here? Just that we had no problem with vandalism or anything like that. We did have a lot of interest from the public, which was great. And then this is Rocky Nook. It's a lot darker. Oh, I know what I was going to say about Gutierrez. We moved our sampling point from Montecito to Gutierrez because USGS just put in a gauge there. And this is wonderful. We were going to have to work a lot harder to get flow rates to be able to calculate load, and now I'm so thankful. And this is trying to perfect our methods to collect the street sweeper debris. I feel really good about the storm samples that we collected. I feel like that's going to be a pretty good way to calculate the average concentration in wet weather. I feel like good range of good representation of storms, good representation of where we were in the we just didn't have any problems. This is a lot harder. We thought we were going to be able to sample into the side of the street sweeper where that hatch opens, and that's not really working well at all. So now we are taking after the street sweeper is dumped, we're taking shovelfuls of it and sifting it. It doesn't feel perfect yet. I hope we get a little bit better. So our next steps in 2025 are to finish that dry weather sampling, and we're trying to spread that out through the year so we get the seasonal, we're bringing in the seasonal variation to our averaging. And then we have our objective 3, which is our street sweeper optimization study. And we'll do that in summer 2025. We were going to do it in Los Angeles, but I think we're going to try to find location here in Santa Barbara. That'll make it easier for everyone, I think. And then UCSB is finalizing the simulated microplastic that we'll put out there on the streets. It looks like this. So first, we have a known mix of sediment itself and microplastic. You distribute that on a test surface. We have about, I think it's 5 pounds per run. So we take this, what is that? It's like a seed. It's for putting out seeds, I think. Yeah, fertilizer. That's what I meant. Fertilizer. So we'll use that to have a very even amount of dirt and plastic. Then you have the street sweeper drive past it, so you know exactly how much you put out there. It's 5 pounds over however many feet. Then the street sweeper goes by, and then you vacuum it up with a vacuum, and the difference is what was removed by the street sweeper. So this is much more controlled than. This is not like trying to get an order of magnitude estimate like our first. This is really exactly how much was removed so that we know exactly which types of sweepers work better in exactly which conditions. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Jill. Very informative and interesting study, and great to hear that you were making progress through year one and that year two's well on track, and we finally got some rain, so you could do some storm sampling, which is exciting. Hopefully, we get some rain next year too to continue, and it'll be really interesting to see some of those simulated street sweeping surveys. I want to see if there's any questions or comments from the committee members.
Jill,
Committee
thank
member
you.
Moore?
Just a quick question. Do you have any hypothesis during, I think it's objective 3, that the street sweeper actually puts up some of those microplastics into the air stream, and hence you're not capturing it when you're revacuuming it, and you're not capturing it when you're sampling, so what about the air, but through a street sweeper issue?
That is such an astute question and a good question. I always tell my kids it's a good question when I don't have the answer. But we were discussing exactly that today. So do you want the long answer? Okay. The short answer is yes, I think it can be a concern, and we're looking into whether we can attach air quality monitors onto the side of the sweeper so that we are seeing what is removed in the cloud. But, where does that cloud go? Does it settle back down there, or does it blow further away? And I would say watching it looks like it blows further away. Then the longer one, and a lot of this is new to me, is two of our partners, our Cascade Water Resources. It's Roger Sutherland and Ranger Kidwell Ross. They are the two people who probably know the most about actual on-the-ground street sweeping on the planet. They're on our team, and they are probably going to retire soon. And this is really their passion project. And they really want to expand this study to add on, to develop a testing protocol for street sweepers. That can't be done as part of our grant. And so I just sat in with them, meeting with the Air Quality Management District to try to get more funding to make this a bigger study. And this is what I didn't know. Street sweepers in Southern California have to be certified for making sure they're not spreading too much PM10. And that tests and the certification were done in 1999. And Ranger feels like that should be updated. And so that probably won't include microplastic. So that probably won't be part of this grant, not really the purview of the Creeks Division. But so we're helping in any way we can, and it might end up being they get more money, and then that goes straight to, the city doesn't have anything to do with that. That goes to basically paying someone, another lab or UCSB, to do additional testing. So that is all TBD. But it's just, we couldn't have planted it any better. Thank you. Yeah. Committee members, Stephanie?
So, I know, kind of silly nerd questions. Well, first of all, I was curious if the USGS gauge was working at Rocky Nook right now.
The USGS gauge is working to measure stage, and but I think they might be updating their stage discharge curve.
Okay.
And also Gutierrez only has stage right now, but when I was out there sampling, they were collecting flow data to create a stage discharge curve.
Yeah, it's exciting. that
I
it's
know.
there, Yeah. So I had a few little questions. Does it matter where in the column the sample is drawn? I know different plastics have different densities. Yeah.
Yeah, it does matter. And when we did our pilot project with some students, and we were funded by Associated Students Coastal Fund, I think, and it was the city that did the sampling. I don't think, we just tried to put it, we tried to put the strainer at the end of the tubing in the middle of the water column, and they did not find the tire wear particles. And it might have been because those are lower. So you've got the stuff that's less dense, that's higher. You've got the stuff that's, the tire wear particles could be lower, and so that's why we are trying to go up and down. It won't be perfect. It really won't be perfect.
I think this is a really cool study. The other two kind of related questions is, does it matter in what period of the storm that you're taking?
Well, that's what it does. It does in a paper that it just came out this week showing that the peak of the storm had, like so many pollutants, especially particulate, had higher concentrations, so vastly higher loads at the peak of the storm. And that was mostly true for tire wear particles because they're heavy, so they have to get mobilized. So that is why we are compositing 2 composites per storm. I can go back. And this was hypothetical. I look forward to plotting out what we actually did. So on the right, it's a composite over the rising hydrograph, a composite over the falling hydrograph. The falling one we did spread out more. And there are so many ways to do this. Flow-weighted composite sampling, that's really for when you're picking, like you have bottles and you're deciding how to composite your bottles. And this is much different because we're pumping. And so what we did was we had said the predicted amount of rain, so say 2 inches, divide that by 10, and then pump 10 liters every time we hit that increment. So when it's raining harder, the creek is higher, we're pumping more over a shorter period of time. So we used rain as a proxy for flow, which at Gutierrez is really accurate.
And then the last related thing is the location. Does being near a bridge impact this?
I do not know the answer to that question. I don't know how we could safely sample not from a bridge. I'm trying to find the pictures.
Could you kind
I
of
don't know how in the world you could possibly sample the water column left to right and up to down not being on a bridge. It's interesting because a lot of the auto samplers that have been installed in the past, they put the tubing is really at the bottom. They kind of put a conduit, and then the tubing goes to the bottom of the creek. And so we didn't want to do something like that because of all of the less dense microplastics. I don't know how it would, more
Yeah.
than any other.
I mean, it just kind of has a little buffeting, it's hitting a structure, the flow.
Oh.
So it's a little disruption.
Yeah, no, this was visually pretty laminar.
Okay.
At this site, not so much at Rocky Nook. I think it would be best, actually. Of course, when we moved from Montecito to Gutierrez, where it's more of a laminar, I think it might be better to sample at a place where it's fully turbulent and fully mixed, and then not have to worry about the up and down side to side.
Yeah, it's hard to not have turbulent flow near a bridge just by the nature of
Yeah, but there was definitely, this was not even right to left. So like, is there a pinch point where you would say it's really fully mixed? That would probably be the best. But I don't know where we could do that, and that will have to be the next study anyways, even if we can't identify it.
It's a great study. Thank you.
Did you have any other questions from the advisory committee? No? Well, thanks again, Jill. Did you have?
Oh, no, I just wanted to thank you for the detailed questions. I enjoy that. Thank you.
Yeah, great presentation. Looking forward to staying updated as the project continues. So with that, I believe
You do go to public comment?
Oh, or is it public comment? Yeah,
Just open up public comment.
Yeah, I forget when it's just for discussion. We do public comment too. Any members of the public would care to share any comments? Seeing none in person, are there any online, Stephanie? Thanks for that reminder. Sorry about that. And with that, I believe it is 7:12, and we are adjourning our Creeks Advisory Committee meeting. Thanks, everyone.